I'm Henry Gordon-Smith. I'm an urban agriculture consultant. If you don't know, I was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in Hong Kong in my childhood until I was about 6, and then moved to Tokyo, and then back to Hong Kong, and then Germany when I was 10, and then 12 years old I moved to the Czech Republic, and then I was 16 years old, moved to Moscow, Russia. So all before the age of 18, lived in a number of different places, a number of different cultures. I think when you interact with so many different cultures at a young age, you learn a couple different things. You learn how to listen to people. It's really the best way to survive, let's say, is to be open-minded to different cultures and trying to observe and listen first before reacting. So you don't go into a place thinking, this is what I want to get out of it, everyone needs to adapt to me, but instead you learn to listen and be more adaptive to the surroundings around you. I think that's been a huge advantage to me in my career and in my personal life. You know, in the end, it's about people, whether it's business or otherwise, it's about people. I'm grateful for the experiences I had to learn and observe those. So it just inspired me to have more of a big picture vision. So when I think about a problem, I'm both capable of looking at the problem from a single operation or a single person's challenge, and then taking a step back and finding relationships, connectivity to other issues in other places. And that allows me to say, well, what was the solution there, and what can we take away from that and maybe apply to this unique context? They call us third culture kids. The culture that our parents grew up in, that was brought in through our home, then we have the culture of the places that we're living, and then we have this third culture, which is these people we interacted with that were also moving around and living in different places, and that's the third culture that I grew up in. All of that kind of really shifts your thinking, and I'm very grateful for those experiences that my parents allowed me to have. As a child, one of the things I really loved about Hong Kong was the density of it, and I think that has really led me to go towards vertical farming. You know, how do you maximize space and make use of it? Japan was also a big part of that. But let's say starting with Hong Kong, one of my favorite things was, you know, they have these pedestrian walkways that go through buildings at different levels. In Hong Kong, they've got these pedestrian pathways connecting the towers, so suddenly there's another level of pedestrian activity above the bottom level. And in some cases, there might be 3. And I call this now urban layering. And before my blog, Agritecture.com, I started another small photo blog called Urban Layering, and this was about this concept of, instead of just going dense, you know, with tall towers, what happens when we actually add additional layers to the city for density? How does this maximize the localization of the city? And that was one of the key takeaways from Hong Kong. All the parks there are beautiful. They're embedded into the hillsides, very urban. You know, how they maintain them, I think, is also something I observed and learned a lot from. In Japan, in contrast, it has so many things that are just unique to that Japanese culture. Well, in Japan, it's the city block. So instead of the street having the numbers, it'll be all the 4 streets that make the block. And so you might get someone's house is at block so-and-so, number this. So you have to kind of figure it out where on the block it is, and that's a different way of thinking about physical space in the city that I found very interesting. So in Japan, the role of technology is right up front in your face as a consumer, whether that's shopping for Christmas gifts, and technology is so heavy. And I don't mean just like electronics, new cameras and this and that, but I mean like really high-tech alarm clocks. You know, it's got like a mouth that starts yelling and things like that. It's all very gimmicky and bright and shiny, and so there's this playfulness with technology that is so prevalent in Japan that I think also inspired me. In Germany, you just learn to manage everything in a specific way, and there's punishments if you don't. So if you don't compost, you'll get fined, or your neighbors will complain about, you know, anything spilling over out of your bin. Why do you have so much waste? Is it really necessary? You know, why can't you control yourself? The Czech Republic, as a country that was reviving from communism and being modernized, you know, that's really when we moved there. You know, you have these very old, beautiful architectural, you know, structures that need to be preserved, and then you have this modernization of high-tech, energy-efficient buildings. And the city, I think, has done a really good job in combining those two and renovating the old spaces and reminding the city that this is really a historical. The walkability in Prague and the tram system there, I think, is just super efficient and wonderful. As Russia reminded me, these mega cities that exist in the world. You know, we think we are in a huge city. New York's around 8. Moscow's 12 million people. These people, you know, go through cold winters. I learned the way we value human life in the West versus how it's valued in countries like India, Russia, China, also enormous populations, enormous city centers. It's very different. We value human life in a more significant way. The megapolis of Moscow really taught me that we people can get lost in the city, and this gentrification or the movement of the wealthy can really cut those people off. So yeah. When I was younger, I wanted to be an actor. I was really into theater. Then I wanted to be an architect. I was really into design and architecture. Then I wanted to go into the foreign service when I was about 18 years old, and I went to study political science, and I thought, with my languages, my international upbringing, this is going to make sense. And then I did an internship with the International Organization for Migration, and it was like the slowest, dullest organization I'd ever worked for, and I suddenly realized, oh, damn it, I have to get into business. I need that fast-moving thing to make me feel good that I'm making a difference. And in the public sector, I didn't feel like I was going to be able to make that difference. I felt like it was so slow, and in some cases, these organizations just exist for their own sake, to maintain their own existence. That wasn't good enough for me. When I was about 24, I guess, I realized, okay, now I need to figure out business and get into that. And that was really hard. I had never learned it, studied it, or been trained in it. So I just chose entrepreneurship and this focus on, what is a problem, or what is something I'm missing, that's missing out there. And in that case, it was the blog, right? It was this place that wasn't just talking about soil-based urban ag or just talking about high-tech urban ag, which there wasn't very much out there then. But what happens when we talk about them together? What happens when we also bring in utopian visions with real business and real news so that the audience can actually feel like they can get involved? I just started thinking about the problem to be solved, and then that's when I was able to build my brand. This is what I'm about, this is what I'm contributing to the world. I just focused on solving a problem first and choosing my niche. The business opportunity kind of reveals itself if you really are solving a problem. I think the political science, did lead me to food. I had this professor, Dr. Raul Pacheco-Vega, and he was teaching us about water wars and environmental security. And this is a discipline that looks at how do nation states behave in the face of resource scarcity. What changes? How do they act on the international stage? And what you realize is that there's this backward resource challenge in trade, in virtual water crossing borders, water wars, food security issues, labor issues relating to resources. And those drive a lot of the political stage that we don't see when you're watching the news. It's not talked about in that way. And so this allowed me to frame and analytically look at those issues. And that really inspired me to start thinking about the city and how cities could play a new leading role in the 21st century as independent leaders in the environmental movement, in new forms of political and community engagement. And so that's when I started thinking about, well, what does it take for a city to be independent? And that was the bridge from political science into food security and urban agriculture. I started the blog at that time, and then I graduated and pursued further studies in that topic. How do you understand buildings, and what's the trend there? What's happening with LEED? What's happening with Living Building Challenge? How are we transforming building code to make it more environmentally friendly? It kind of all connected at that point. A one-way ticket to New York about 5 years ago with this dream of being an urban farmer. I was this close for my visa running out, and I had to leave, so I had to make a decision. I looked at the program at Columbia, and I knew Dickson was there. Maybe this is a way that I can get his attention and maybe study with him. And I would also be able to have a visa, and then I'd also learn these amazing things. But as many of you know, Columbia is not cheap, and so I had to take out a big loan. It was a big risk, and my advice is to really think about that decision carefully, how much money you're going to make after you graduate. As Susie Orman says, you should be making at least what you paid for your degree after you graduate, otherwise it's not worth taking the degree. So imagine a spectrum from low-tech to high-tech, in this case urban agriculture. So on the low-tech side, we have community gardens. There's safe spaces for the community to come and learn, to get food, sometimes discounted or free food, and also be active. That's contributing to biodiversity, that's contributing to green infrastructure, managing rainwater, in a way that all the way on this spectrum, a high-tech vertical farm, which is typically an indoor warehouse, artificially lit, no soil, no sun. This business is about controlling every variable, which is why it's so high-tech. It has a different benefit. It's producing more food using less resources at scale. It is probably producing more jobs, so maybe has an economic development benefit from that perspective. It's producing year-round, but it's not necessarily contributing to biodiversity directly. It's not necessarily transforming the experience of residents in the city through the aesthetics. Some of them are. Gotham Greens and Gowanus with the rooftop. These are communicating to you what's happening, so that it is changing the aesthetic. As you move along this spectrum, there's different trade-offs. The cost of this type on the high-tech side is much more per square foot than a community garden. So when you're planning a farm and you're thinking of what you're going to do, you need to think about your return on investment. And that return on investment will be defined based upon what you're spending and how you're going to get that back over time. And if you're not looking at all the tools in your toolbox, then you're not being responsible. And so that's as we go through feasibility studies for our clients, and even when they come to us and they say, I want to build a vertical farm, we're going to educate them on soil. We're going to educate them on hydroponic greenhouse or hydroponic outdoor and show them the differences so that they can make that decision responsibly and not just be lured in by the lights and the colors and all of this. And I think this is the next frontier for agriculture, is really saying we are going to develop cities and communities with agriculture as a key driver for their resilience. Because agriculture, better than anything, captures the food, water, energy nexus. So what better way to encourage sustainable development than through agriculture? But in order for cities to do this properly, they need to understand those trade-offs. And that's why all this data coming from these farms and all these new case studies and these successful business models are really accelerating the industry. And I hope going to help accelerate decision makers, policy makers, city leaders, resiliency groups, to make smart decisions about the variety of farms we have in and near the city. Because it's not going to be one type. Vertical farming is not going to save agriculture and save the world, but an integrated, connected, holistic agricultural system could. It could really change our society. It could make us more sustainable, more resilient to climate change. It could revitalize jobs and education in a way that we haven't seen in decades. So there's a lot of hope there, but only if it's an integrated and holistic strategy. With Harlem Grown, Tony Hillary came up to me and one of my colleagues at Columbia and said, hey, can you help us make our greenhouse winter ready? We need a low-cost way to make the greenhouse winter ready. And I thought, what an exciting opportunity. I don't need to get paid for that because the opportunity there was, let me do something free. I'll do the research. I'll give it my best try. Tony knows he's getting something free. He knows we're going to give it our best shot. But then we have this case study of something we've done and we've learned from it. So that's how you make the decision. Is it something? Am I learning something new? Am I really helping a group that needs the help, that they're desperate, they can't get it anywhere else? Is there a story here I can tell afterwards to market the fact that I did it? So we had a lot of fun. We had to lift the greenhouse a little bit and insulate it below, and we wrapped it in insulation, and then we actually worked on a wood chip stove to keep it warm through the winter, because they didn't have year-round production at Harlem Grown with their greenhouse because they didn't have any heating. So it was kind of like, well, why do you have a hydroponic greenhouse if you're not producing in the winter? So Tony really wanted that story, and we helped him get there. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have. Everyone needs to keep learning. Everyone needs to give back. And if you think about it strategically, it's going to make it much easier to say yes or no. I was so naive at the beginning. I thought technology is kind of the solution to farming, and it's very easy to go down that path. But when you visit the farms and you see the grind and the work that the head growers, the scientific growers, and then all the laborers that support them are going through every day, it's like it feels so ridiculous to be selling them on technology as a solution. Because they're dealing with these crops on a daily basis. They're literally looking at every single plant to try and find a pest, looking for every single leak, dealing with customers that could be happy or unhappy. So I think the first takeaway was, wow, respect the farmer, respect the grower, and never assume that an operation can exist with just an app. No matter how high tech it is, and even if the grower can be on the beach controlling it, they still have to be a grower, and they have to know how to talk to the people on the ground. But I still think we're in a space where we need farmers. We need actually agriculturalists, horticulturalists, people who understand plants, botany, plant science, and all of those things together, because the grower also has to innovate and do R&D and sometimes get on TV to talk about why the farm is amazing. They have such a challenging and multidisciplinary job when it comes down to it. So I don't know, the first one was just respect. The next one was waste. It's really shocking how much waste there is on farms in general. And even the best farmers try to avoid that, but because they're in it so much, and it just naturally happens, when through production something isn't good enough, okay, that goes in the waste pile. Or the substrate that we use to grow it is better, but it's not compostable, so it goes in the waste. When they go through that harvest after harvest after harvest, they can only worry so much about it, right? So they become a bit numb to it, and if it's not really changing their bottom line, then it's just going to be part of their operation. So when you see that waste, you really see, okay, there's really room for innovation there. either through automation technologies or really new kinds of substrate materials is a big one, or nutrients that are organic, for example, as opposed to inorganic. The other thing you see, especially with the high-tech farms, is, there's a lot of equipment and a lot of over-engineering sometimes that the farms have, and I think, again, that's when the grower and the executives don't really get along. The executives will kind of be like, let's make it as high-tech as possible because that's what the investors want, and the grower's kind of going for simplicity and proven best practices. So sometimes there's a divide there, and sometimes you go to facilities, you're like, well, that is so unnecessary in its engineering, and people call it their IPs. Typically, you're not just a grower, you're a producer, right? So you have to sell your product, or somebody in the team has to sell your product, or you have to lose your margin to a wholesaler. And that reality is a really important one to understand, because that really transforms the bottom line for these farms. And if you have something to contribute from a marketing and sales perspective, there's a really big place for you in indoor agriculture or agriculture in general, because consumer trends are shifting so rapidly. You want to have the mind to create new products out of the same product and then communicate that to the customer, get them excited about it. Sometimes in the case of local farms, get them to pay more for the product. Bottom line is just farming is really difficult. You hear it all the time. When you see it in action, it's just like a day-by-day difficulty. It's not like it's, okay, that was a hard week, and then you go back 4 weeks and it's hard again. No, it's like every day. Every day could be really hard. Harlem Grown was my starting point, and then afterwards I wrote again to Bright Farms, Gotham Breeds, and Sky Vegetables, who at the time all had greenhouses. And I got a no from Gotham Breeds and Bright Farms, and I got a yes from Sky Vegetables. So I said, okay, well, that's how I chose. So I kind of wrote to them. I said, look, I want to give you social media help. In exchange, I want to work on the farm 2 days a week to learn hydroponics in a commercial setting. And so that's a smart move too. If you have something you can contribute to make it like, okay, I'm not just volunteering and you have to find things for me to do all the time, but define your role and be very proactive about it, it makes it easier for them, especially these startups that just don't have the resources to just organize interns all the time. It can be a burden for them. So that was my in, and that was great because I got to really learn how to communicate about the farm and all the pieces in it, what's working, what's not, how do we engage people, how do we engage the community, what's the relationship there, and then I also got to learn, hands-on growing. And Joe Schwartz was my boss at the time, very experienced grower. He was tough on me, but it was good, that's how I did it. So I kind of sprayed and prayed, and then I picked the one that said yes. So I remember very early on, I wrote down once in my notebook as I was kind of planning my 5-year plan, I said, okay, this isn't about building your career. This isn't about building a business. This is about building an industry. And by framing my thinking that way, it allowed me to really build a brand that was about that connectivity and also a strategy behind that on how do I engage with the community, how do we do things like the NYC Ag Collective or the Association for Vertical Farming, these community projects. And you plant that idea, and then when you become genuinely engaged in that idea, your brand becomes natural. But the first time I really realized that it was sticking and becoming a brand was when I got invited to a conference in Abu Dhabi. The Global Forum for Innovations in Agriculture had invited me to speak about these various approaches, and I was this other person that could talk about it from a bird's eye perspective, and that's when it clicked. I was like, okay, this is my unique contribution to the industry, is to say that. And so I had to make some decisions. I had to say, well, in order for me to maintain that, I have to do a couple things. I have to make sure that the content on the website continues to be varied and not just move towards tech, but find the right stories that are pushing what I call agritecture, which is the art, science, and practice of integrating agriculture to the built environment. So anything that captures that is basically approved to be on the site. Maybe even groups that are critical of me, I feature them on the site. Or competitors to our consultancy, I feature them on the site. Or technologies that maybe I wouldn't endorse myself. That's not what we're doing by featuring them on Agritecture. We're trying to extend the dialogue. Those are our values, is to be transparent and tech agnostic in our approach. And I think when people see our brand, I think they feel that. I get the feedback that they recognize what it means. They recognize what we're contributing and our place as it relates to others. I'm very, very happy that was the result. And I saw the space for lease, and I said, we got to get it. And so that's why we're in Brooklyn. Stone's throw from around me is Edenworks, AgTech X, Oko Farms, Square Roots is over there, Feedback Farms, Living Restoration isn't that far. So it's all here. I mean, East Williamsburg is where the urban agriculture tech revolution is happening in New York, so we want it to be here. I think the majority of mistakes that we see with farms, urban farms, again, what we're talking about specifically, especially involving the tech, is improper planning. Take the time to build your archive, your hands-on experience, observe, learn, pilot. Definitely don't go too big too fast. I know your investors are probably like ready to go and gone, but remind them how young this industry is. Remind them that for your company to be stronger in the long term, there are steps to get there. So think very carefully about those steps. What is the planning stage? What is the piloting stage? Getting the customer awareness, testing the technology, proving your model, and then what is the scale up? For example, as a consultancy, between concept development, feasibility study, implementation, and then support. And that concept development stage is a critical one because that's when you're really observing your competition, like who is doing this in a similar way, what am I going to do different from them, and we're going to be competing on price. It's not a really good decision in most cases, so how can you come up with something unique? You start off with listing all of the possible problems that relate to the problem you're solving. What are the top three? What are the most important problems? The next stage is, okay, well, what are all the possible solutions to that problem? One might be a vertical farm, one might be a soil-based farm, one might be procuring produce from a farm and not even building one. You talk about those solutions and narrow them down to the best one. Once you can hone in on your strategy and the solution, the problem you're solving, and the key solutions to that, you have a business idea. The technology and the equipment is really your means to get there. But really, your main IP, your main approach is what's your model? What's your unique offering to the market? What's your unique offering to investors and to customers that you're putting out there? And it's usually based around a problem. So I think that planning stage is so critical. It's tough, because in some cities there's no recognition for urban ag. In some cities, even with our clients, we'll try and inform them of the permitting as much as possible and develop a timeline for implementation. But very, very often there's delays in equipment arriving, or a permitting issue, or a fire code issue. Look for help. Don't try and do it on your own, whether it's a consultant or whether that's some collaborators in your community that you can work with. If you've planned it out really well, you should have a pretty good picture of your timeline, and any construction project can run over, whether it's urban ag or not. There's a framework that allows you to say, this person on my team is responsible, this person needs to be informed, this person is accountable. So you define the different roles. It's not just, okay, this is a task, but if I do a task, I might need you to also be aware that I finished that task so that you can start your next task. It's those connections that you want to identify so things progress smoothly. A lot of people think of social media as getting a message out, right? I'm pushing a message out. I want to tell people what I'm doing, my event, my brand. Social media is just as much about observing as it is about putting it out. So don't forget that. Choose what you're liking or commenting on, engage in a conversation, try to understand the trends. Well, social media is a great low-cost way to test out that language. This is your time not only to pilot your farm and your technology and your product, but also your marketing messaging. Take some time to observe and listen, follow people that are similar to you, see how they're communicating it, observe that. Did they get a lot of engagement? Why not? People will like the attractive images. They'll just like them a lot and even comment on them, but that doesn't necessarily actually typically translate to an action. And then when I create something that's more in depth, right? So a post about the average age of US farmer is this, and I include a hashtag that goes to my event hashtag so they see that, I actually can find more engagement because the comment itself has some depth. It's teaching them something, even though the image isn't as attractive. And I'm literally talking about the difference between, recently the difference between 30 likes and 350 likes. So it's quite a dramatic difference. Definitely do not just look at likes and comments as engagement. Unless your mission is just to let people know what your brand is. If that's it, if it's just you have some reason that you just want the name to be exposed to them, then you're basically just putting out attractive, interesting, things that people can like quickly. But if you want a decision out of that, you're going to think a little more strategically and observe a little bit more carefully on how that transfer is happening. What I did at an early part of my career, which is that this allows you to get to events and get a media pass. You don't have to pay for the event, or it allows you to pursue people for interviews. The goal there isn't likes and that. The goal is just, do you have a space where people feel like, oh, I want to be featured on that? And that's a very different goal than getting clients or getting event purchases. So just know what you want, and then formulate the plan, and then observe and adjust. When I got invited to a conference, expenses paid to go to Abu Dhabi, I felt, I was like, I'm not worthy, you know? I need to elevate my language, my professionalism, everything about me to start interacting with people. Okay, now we're talking to big companies. I mean, Boxman has 1 million employees. So it was astonishing, and that was a big milestone. It's been great to do this work in New York as a local, and in that case, we're working, with Councilman Espinal, and we're, volunteering and giving it knowledge and trying to create engagement, and that's because this is our home. But to get recognition from another city, that's a really good sign and a great moment of recognition. I won 40 under 40 for food policy in New York City, and then I got one of the top 10 influencers in produce by Produce Grower magazine. And then I was, in Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. That was just exciting to do that. And I think you need to celebrate those victories, and I think they can be very small. They can start like something like meeting Dickson Despommier. That was a big milestone for me too, and working with him and getting my book signed. That to get to where you want to be, you have to have a clear vision of that. What do you want? Where are you going? And then move backwards. What are the steps? What are the little things? And imagine yourself. What does that look like? What do you act like when you're there? What is the impression you want people to have of you? If you think about this enough, I think you can manifest it happening. And I think that's why you need to celebrate all of those wins along the way, because when you get there, it's you. You did that. And so you need to celebrate that, and then you're going to be courageous and ready for the next milestone. And there will be a next one. I never thought that we were on the other side. Like, I never thought that the community gardeners were there and we, the tech people, are here. Or even regional farmers outside of the city and we, the urban farmers. And that's a totally different divide, but very similar in its format. They're critical of us, like, what are you really growing? And like, what do you how sustainable are you really? Because you have all this equipment together. And I was like, are we all on the same team here? And there are very clear race issues when it comes to food, food equity, entrepreneurship and funding, and who that funding is going to. I'd rather spend 30 minutes talking about how we can teach entrepreneurship to at-risk youth than talk about for 30 minutes the structural, and prejudice and lack of privilege that at-risk youth live in. I have some foes that I guess I wasn't really expecting. There's older people in this industry that are selling equipment or technology. Often will be trolling on LinkedIn and being very critical of young people who are trying to be consultants or be innovators or be farmers. And I am just so surprised. We have such an enormous problem to solve. The average age of the US farmer is 58. Don't you understand that it's going to take at least 30 years to reverse that trend? We have a lot to learn from experienced folks in the space. We're going to get there through mentorship, through constructive criticism. I think we need to have a bigger vision than just you versus us. I think my fellow bloggers are surprising allies. Like the people who maybe I thought might be maybe the most specific competition, right? Because it's like, oh, we're competing for attention and likes and traffic. No, it's like we get to work together. We get to co-produce content. We get to celebrate each other's different angles. And I think that's, at first I was like, I don't know, like maybe I didn't know my strategy there. And then there was so much warmness that I got from fellow bloggers who had a similar idea of producing content and sharing these ideas, again, to solve this bigger problem, that those became surprising allies. And I'm really grateful for that. There's a bit of a renaissance of these startups. So they build their first facility, they prove their concept, and then they'll try to raise money. And so they can start the first one out, but often it's very haphazard. They're practicing safe use of machinery, safe fire code, safety in the way they should. And if they get in trouble for doing something, then that hurts all of us. We want to get ahead of those challenges to grow the industry, which again, that's when the NYC Ag Collective came about. I just wrote to everyone I knew that had a farm and had a technology company in New York. And I said, let's meet once a month. And we went around the circle. We said, what are the problems we're all facing? What are the 4 things we want to target? And it was sharing data with each other, cross-promotion of our activities, helping with recruiting, and then influencing policy was the last one we said. When you go as a coalition, when you're not going as an individual party, the city can't really say no. And so now we're getting into those conversations. I think regulation is better because I think it helps investors feel safer about the technology and the approach. I think it also attracts other companies that are considering setting up facilities in New York to test it here. We want to be the place that people choose to set up their first farm in the US. We can be the Silicon Valley of ag tech. To create that climate, we need to have regulation, we need to have clear policies. And the city, meaning the Department of Buildings and these agencies are saying, well, if we keep it vague, it allows you to kind of do your thing and try it out. We are asking to be regulated for a specific reason, which is going to help improve health and safety. It's going to help our industry scale up. It's going to help investment come in. It's going to help consumers be safer, employees be safer. We do NYC Ag Tech Week, and we show them the abundance of the produce we can grow. We show them the tours. We show them the employees and how many millennials are leaving their desk jobs to work in farms. Our collective is stronger than it's ever been, and the city is recognizing us. I mean, once we get a big win in New York, I hope that we can export the bylaws of our collective. Those bylaws should be shared with everyone so that they can repeat it. It's a place, it's like if you can grow it here, then you can grow it anywhere because it's expensive and you want to get the consumers excited about it. It's going to probably get some news. So this is the source of the innovation any way you look at it. And this is the entry point for a lot of the European companies and the US and the Asian companies wanting to get to the US market. But because it's so difficult, there are companies who are saying, oh, I'm going to go to the Middle East or I'll go to some other city instead first. Because it isn't regulated and it isn't organized in the way it should be and it isn't recognized. But an app where you could enter any site in Boston and it would tell you all the regulations for any kind of farm integration you want to make. When I saw that, I was like, that is what we need. You don't only need the policy, you need the energy behind it, and New York has that. New York has the energy of this entrepreneurship and of this collaboration, this community of farmers. Boston has a much smaller version of that. So I think it'd be interesting to look at, although Boston has more advanced policy, are there really more farmers than there were before? Really part of the story is doing the policy. You need the bottom up and the top down together to really create a thriving environment. That's why I think Atlanta has the potential to be a huge leader in this space because they're doing it for both angles. They've got a thriving community that's building entrepreneurship, and then top down they have the director of urban agriculture, and they have very specific policies for all kinds of urban ag, and they have specific targets they're trying to hit in regards to food equity that are driving this. On the global stage, technology-wise, all over Japan, there's various unique approaches to plant factories and indoor agriculture that are quite advanced and have been around since the 80s. So, there's a lot of leadership and recognition needs to go there. Singapore, from a policy perspective, is probably the most comprehensive, urban planning solution as it connects to a food access and food, more like a food security goal that they have. So they're looking for all kinds of integrations and as much as possible. They want to be an independent city, which is a very different strategy from we want 20% local food or more food access. Singapore wants to be food independent entirely if they can. So Paris is doing amazing work, but I think that's more on green roofs and greening the city. New York has this very unique opportunity and timing. If we can get the city to start giving some legislation, it could accelerate the space and really hold its position as the leader. We'll see. What Mario Cambardella does, the director of urban agriculture for Atlanta, he visits the farms, he listens to their needs, and then he knows the language to talk to the city and represent them. And that's what we need, is someone who can go and represent the variety, not just the high-tech side, but the whole variety. I think I'm still working on my knowledge of soil-based agriculture. I've been mostly in hydroponics, but I think if I worked on that more, and I will be, I'd be certain to put my name in there. There's very clear psychology and evidence about the kind of marketing that works and doesn't. And one of the problems we have as environmentally conscious individuals is we can focus on the negative and the urgency and this, and that doesn't resonate with the masses. So we need to find really, for lack of a better word, corporate strategies. And in the end, this has to be driven by consumer demand. If the consumer doesn't want to buy it, if they don't value it, and they don't understand that they're creating wealth in the local economy and reducing carbon footprint of food potentially, and creating local jobs. We really have to change their hearts and minds. But we can create events that are, bringing in a wider audience. We know it takes a long time to change behavior through marketing, and we know it's it's not cheap. So this has to be something that's a coordinated effort from multiple parties. There might be more regional or statewide organizations, like the Produce Marketing Association does these kinds of ads, or you see the milk campaigns, the Got Milk. We are eventually going to need things like that. Really collaborative, pooled resources to convince consumers. We can't get there unless the farmers can scale up their operation. You look at Michelle Obama and what she did. I think she's a big player, or was a big player in that. And kids at least are aware that when they go to the grocery store, okay, that is processed, this is not processed. And there's a very clear difference between those things, and this is better for me because it's real food. That message has to keep going at home. And I guess Zoe Deschanel is kind of doing something like this now. Kimball Musk plays a role in this, as well, although he could broaden out the discussion to include other forms of agriculture besides high-tech as players in this. But he's doing this with schools. There's a lot of players that are contributing to this, and I think we just need to collaborate more. I think that on the high-tech side, the next big thing in urban ag is automation and sensor technology. Really how those technologies were lowered in cost and now can be integrated and give insights. I think that's the next thing, is how urban farmers and rural farmers work together for a bigger, wider system, a stronger food system, and also how community gardeners, who are typically have been around much longer than commercial urban farmers, how they work together. We need to have shared interest, we need to have shared vision, we need to have shared strategy. Not everything's going to be the same, but we need to have some agreement there. And I think that's the next thing from the kind of policy, structure, strategy side that I'm getting more excited about, the role that we can play in fostering that. Right? So typically indoor agriculture is GMO free, but now the breeders are starting to look at this and say, well, I think we can help you grow double your yield if we produce the right seed for you. So that's a predicament, right? Because now you're like, okay, well, we're indoor, we're pesticide free, we're local, but we have a difficult business case. Like, our margins are still thin because we're farmers. So if you can double my yield indoors, and they can do it, right? They can say, well, based on indoor climate, which is very different from outdoor, we can actually genetically engineer a plant that's going to perform better there. So that is tough. And everybody has varying opinions about that, but I think that's something to keep an eye on, because that could make this industry go from very challenging economically to quite profitable. So my parents are very driven and successful people, so I was always interacting with their friends who were also successful people. I would want to get mentorship from them. I was very comfortable talking to older people and learning from them. And there was one woman, Esther Dyson, who's a kind of an angel investor and a tech enthusiast, and I just wanted to learn about her and how she did things, and she was a good mentor. And there have been some others, including Barney Ellis Perry at the University of British Columbia, who mentored me and got me my first blogging job, and has really been a support since then. So I have to give back. I have to, because these people have really helped me just make it and get through some really tough times. I'm a very busy guy, but when I get an email, I should be careful. I answer it. I want to hear your ideas. I want to at least get you to the next step. I might not consult you, but I might get you to the next step and introduce you. And I think that's what we're trying to do with AgTech is to formalize that mentorship. So AgTech is a co-working lab with hydroponic systems here in Brooklyn, and it has a model and an online community as well of mentorship, where we have ambassadors that mentor the members, and also I meet with the members once a month to mentor them. And it's something I really like. If it took me 7 years to get here where I am today, it should only take you 2. And the only way to do that is through mentorship, is by giving away some of the things that I learned early on, so you avoid those mistakes, so you can accelerate much faster. I'm continually going to be mentoring, I think, for the rest of my life, because I'm just so grateful to the mentorship I got in the past. So I think it's very important, and it's valuable. When you become more successful, you can have a tendency to get disconnected from the emerging trends, the emerging ideas, because you're so focused in on your business and your approach or your product or your service. That's a cost, like you need to keep learning even if you become more successful, and certainly I have a long way to go, and I want to keep learning. And one way to do that is to talk to people about their ideas and their creative approaches, and help them move forward, because now you're really thinking on the cutting edge all the time, and observing the trends, and that's an asset, and you'll lose that if you don't talk to young people and if you don't provide mentorship.